This video contains or may contain spoilers for Hollow Knight. If you're well versed in the lore of Hollow Knight, you know that the game has 5 different endings, each with its own scenario of events. We can see exactly what happens immediately thanks to the cutscenes that play when attaining these endings. However, these cutscenes only show what happens in the moment. Have you ever wondered what could happen after that? What are the long-term ramifications? In this video, I'll be going over my own speculations as to what could potentially happen after each of the 5 endings, based on what we see in the cutscenes that follow them, and what else we know about the lore of the game. The simplest ending, often listed first among the 5, is the Hollow Knight ending, named after the achievement earned when it is attained. If we look closely at the cutscene, we can see that the knight is hunched over, barely able to lift their head and body a little at a time, and when the camera zooms in, we can see that they're shaking, even after the seal of binding forms over them. This likely happens because the knight absorbed quite a lot of infection into their small body, as well as a higher being. It probably wasn't intended for a vessel of their size to contain all of this, hence why the Hollow Knight was made to grow as big as they did before being sealed. The question as to what will eventually result from this is whether the knight can successfully contain the Radiance indefinitely. We do see that at least initially, the void inside the knight swallows up the Radiance's light. The White Lady tells the knight that she is confident that they could contain the Radiance forever, but then again, the same was originally believed about the Hollow Knight, and look how that turned out. However, if we assume that the thing that tarnished the Hollow Knight and made them fail as a vessel was a bond with their father, as we see in the memory hidden by the Path of Pain, then the knight wouldn't at least have this specific risk of being impure, having never known their father intimately. Although, they could have formed a similar bond with one of the many bugs they met along their journey, or had some other feeling elicited from them in some other way. We can't really know that for sure, or that any emotion would be enough to tarnish them. The last thing we see in this cutscene is the door to the Black Egg being sealed once more. Some might suspect that this seal is weaker than the one that was there before, since there are no dreamers involved this time. In the case of the dreamers, though, the things that sealed the egg were outside of it, which was why the knight was able to break that seal by finding the dreamers and eliminating them. This time, the only seal present is the one formed from within the Black Egg, implying that there would be no way to get inside the egg except by breaking that seal, which creates a catch-22 situation, as that seal could likely not be broken except from within the egg where it originated. Hopefully that just wouldn't need to happen anyway. Speaking of seals on the Black Egg forming from within it, the next ending to discuss is Sealed Siblings, also named for the achievement it grants. There is a dreamer, if you could call it that, this time, that being Hornet, but she is different from the previous dreamers as her seal forms from inside the egg where her body is physically located. It's even possible that her presence could make this seal stronger than the one from the first ending. But remember what Hornet says as an explanation for why she won't initially join the knight in the fight against the Hollow Knight. She claims that the egg's bindings would drain her since she does not contain void within her like the vessels, and staying in there long enough would be risking her life. What if it did eventually drain her to the point where she couldn't be a dreamer anymore, or even killed her? Would that break the seal on the door, potentially allowing access to inside the black egg where the Knight is now sealed? There is a possibility that Hornet could survive, even if being in the black egg for an extended time could potentially harm her otherwise. It's implied that the previous dreamers were sleeping and acting as seals for a decently long time, seemingly without aging or being at risk of dying from starvation or thirst or anything of the like. However, this could be because Lurian and Hera had other bugs there to tend to them and Monomon submerged herself in preserving liquid. But either way, they were most likely in a state of suspended animation. If the same thing happens to Hornet, she would probably be equally free from the risk of dying due to any outside causes save someone actually killing her. This wouldn't be possible though, as we know that this could only be done by the dreamers' minds being entered through their physical bodies, and Hornet's is inaccessible where it's now inside the egg. I kinda wonder if the Knight having the Void Heart in this ending somehow makes them better able to contain the Radiance using the Void inside themselves. It's also a little ironic in a way that Hornet became a dreamer just like her mother was, and her mother being a dreamer was the whole reason she was born. Then we come to the Dream No More ending. The name of this achievement, and subsequently ending, likely refers to the Radiance no longer having to be contained in a dream, since she is defeated. We don't see the Radiance completely die or disappear, only get dragged down into the Sea of Void after being beaten until she can no longer prevent this from happening to her. Some have speculated that this doesn't necessarily mean that the Radiance is dead, just subdued, either becoming one with the Void or having her light snuffed out by the Void surrounding her. However, we know that higher beings can die, as evidenced by the Pale King. And besides, the Radiance being pulled down into the Void isn't the only thing that happens to her. She also has her face ripped open and is hit with tremendous force, which causes essence to come flying out of her. So even if she wasn't swallowed completely by the Void, I think it's safe to assume that she still would have eventually died from her injuries. One thing that seems pretty clear from the cutscene is that the Knight, at least as we know them, is gone. Even if you're not playing the game in Steel Soul mode, it's heavily implied that the Knight is not coming back this time. All we see of the Knight in the cutscene is their broken shell, but we see in the fight that they transformed into a Void entity, and in the final part of the cutscene that all of the shades in the Abyss return to the Void. Even though we don't see it directly, we can assume that this happened with the Knight too. It's sad to think of them being gone, but at least they're at peace now, being forever one with the Void. One thing to note is that although we see the Knight's broken shell in the cutscene, we don't see the Hollow Knights. I don't think this necessarily means that the Hollow Knights survived though, because if they did, we would likely see them alive in the cutscene like we do with Hornet. Since the Hollow Knight also appears in the Radiance fight as a Void entity, the same thing likely happened to them as the Knight. They willingly broke their own shell so that they could take on a fully Void form for the end of the Radiance battle and then return to be one with the Void once the fight was over. Plus, they stabbed themselves quite a few times during their fight. Like with the Radiance, I think that their injuries alone would have killed them. The Hollow Knight's broken shell was probably there too, even if it isn't directly shown in the cutscene like the Knight's is. For one thing, the Hollow Knight definitely died in the Hollow Knight and Sealed Siblings endings too, and we don't see them dead in those cutscenes either. Although Team Cherry have stated that they believe every Hollow Knight ending to be equally canon, The Dream No More ending is often referred to by fans as the true ending. I think that there are two main reasons for this. The first is that this ending is the one out of the 5 that arguably leaves the least loose ends. The second is that the music that plays during this ending's cutscene is the same that plays during the opening cutscene in which the knight returns to Hallownest, so it really has a sense of this is what was meant to happen from the beginning. Then there are the two Godmaster endings. Getting either one gives you the Embrace the Void achievement, but the two are fundamentally different, at least in the circumstances that ultimately result from them, as we see in the respective cutscenes. What happens both inside Godhome and in the Temple of the Black Egg is the same, but what takes place in the Junk Pit is different. One thing we can know for sure is that the Radiance is definitely gone for good this time, as the void entity called the Shade Lord completely destroys her to the point where she literally explodes into essence. The Godseeker's reaction to this in the cutscene is likely either from awe, fear, or a mix of both. The Shade Lord appears to use the Godseeker to exit the Dream Realm and enter the physical realm through the Godseeker's physical body in the Junk Pit. It makes sense that the Void could go from the Dream Realm to the physical world, as it can also do the opposite. In the Embrace the Void version of this ending, the Shade Lord is at least initially successful in doing so, at least as far as we can see in the cutscene. The question is why exactly it would want to do this, and more importantly, what happens after. This thing is a higher being and could potentially wreak havoc on Hallownest the same way that the Radiance previously did with the infection. If this isn't its intention, then I really don't have any ideas as to what it could be trying to do here instead of just calmly returning to the void like in the Dream No More ending. The next part of the cutscene shows Hornet inside the Temple of the Black Egg being confronted by the Hollow Knight. Interestingly, the Black Egg itself does not appear to have collapsed and receded away like in the Dream No More ending. Hornet takes on a fighting stance, but this may not necessarily mean that either she or the Hollow Knight intend to fight the other, just that she was startled. The fact that the Hollow Knight is freed from the Black Egg means that they got past the Dreamer's seals, likely because those seals don't exist anymore, even if the Knight didn't break them. With the Radiance gone, it's likely that if the Knight didn't kill the Dreamers, the seals undid themselves, possibly even meaning that the Dreamers woke up. After all, in Godseeker mode, it's impossible for the Knight to exit Godhome in order to get to the Dreamers and break their seals. We still don't get any indication as to what's going to happen regarding the Shade Lord, though. Would Hornet and the Hollow Knight fight it together? Could the Hollow Knight somehow contain it like they did the Radiance? Despite the title of this video, I have no concrete ideas as to what could happen after this. The fifth and final ending is named after the object that makes the difference in which events occur, the delicate flower. The one given to the Godseeker is mysteriously able to keep the Shade Lord from escaping into the Junk Pit by the delicate flower appearing to absorb both it and the Godseeker herself. This seems to be triggered by a drop of void escaping from the Godseeker's body falling onto one of the flower's petals. Even though this doesn't grant a different achievement than the previous ending, I think it definitely counts as a separate ending. After all, the Hollow Knight and Sealed Siblings endings are counted as separate, even though the only real difference is whether Hornet is there or not. The delicate flower itself is really a marvel here. The thing falls apart if you accidentally run into a crawlid, but the White Lady wasn't kidding when she said it had rare power. This also makes it obvious why the Grey Mourner cared so much about the flower being a final gift to her lover, why she considered it to be such a special thing, as well as how much she loved her partner, that she would give her such a gift even in death. It can absorb the Shade Lord, a higher being. Does that mean it could have potentially done the same with the Radiance? I'm also not sure exactly what happens to the Godseeker, as she disappears when the flower absorbs the Shade Lord. Did it somehow absorb her too, or transport her somewhere else? I think it's worth noting that the delicate flower is still, well, delicate. If the flower somehow got damaged and therefore destroyed after it absorbed the Shade Lord, that could potentially release the Shade Lord back into Hallownest and make the events of this ending the same as Embrace the Void, assuming the Shade Lord being absorbed by the flower didn't destroy it. Some have even speculated that the flower appears to be disintegrating in the cutscene. Either way, if the flower does stay intact, I think it could successfully contain the Shade Lord indefinitely, since it was, after all, able to absorb it in the first place. That makes this ending an interesting counterpart to the first two endings, in which the Radiance is being contained indefinitely. But even then, if the Hollow Knight couldn't contain the Radiance forever, perhaps the flower won't contain the Shade Lord forever. I'd like to think that it does though, since that scenario leaves things resolved for good. So what do you think happens after each ending? Do you agree with my speculations? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please be sure to give it a like, share it with someone, check out my other Hollow Knight videos, and subscribe for more. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you next time.